Okay, we're back after the phone call.
Well, I was always a reader. I read a lot. Remember, my mother used to walk with me to there was a branch library a couple of blocks away, and we used to walk to the library, and I'd get my books every week. And then, of course, when we got older, um, we'd go to the main library, which you had to take a bus to get to, but we were able to.
Did you go into New York much?
No, no. We did sometimes, but not very much.
So you did go to the museums or anything in New York when you were young?
My parents really didn't have time. They were in
Yeah.
the store all the time. They didn't have time to take me. And that store was open. It was I'll back up. It was closed 3 days a year. 2 days for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Those were the only 3 days that store was closed. Otherwise, it was 7 days a week.
Did they ever take a vacation then?
Not together.
Not together.
Not together. There were times, when my mother would go and she and I would go someplace in the summer, or my father occasionally. I remember going to some camp with him at one time. But the other thing that it was a very large part of their lives was the chorus. My father had an excellent voice, and he always sang in a chorus. And there was a Jewish center in Patterson where they used to go for the rehearsals, and then they'd have concerts a couple of times a year. And
So you went to those.
yeah, we always went to those.
Did you have a radio? Did you listen to sports or anything? Or what did you, I know you're going to laugh, but
Well, we didn't.
did your dad?
No. My father. Well, the first thing I remember was my father having a crystal radio,
Oh, yeah.
and they used to listen to the fights.
Oh, yeah.
And the men in the neighborhood would come to the store, and they'd all listen to the fight. Joe Louis, those fights. We got our first real radio when I was 8 years old, and it was a big console radio.
Yeah.
It was probably about the size of that, even larger with a
Yeah,
elaborate
right.
cabin. It was a Feta. Did you ever hear of a company
No.
called Feta? Well, it was a Feta radio.
With all the big tubes in it.
Yeah, and one of the reasons they got it at the time that they did, when I was 8, I had a whooping cough, and I was out of school for about a month. So this was something, to entertain me, as we got the radio.
Well, what was on the radio? Was that when they had the shows just like we do on TV now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Comedy shows and
But, Eddie Cantor and Fred Allen, and then they'd have the serials, which were 15-minute serials, and it was Uncle Don, and I remember it was one that my mother and I listened to a lot, was Mert and Marge. They were all 15 minutes. They were on 5 nights a week. So you'd listen to the
and
serial.
some advertising then, right? They did the advertising on the radio, just like on TV now, right? I mean, probably
yeah.
a lot of cigarette advertising.
Yeah, and I remember it advertised different soap, Lux, Rinso White was a big thing, and Lucky Strikes.
Yeah.
Lucky Strike Green has gone to war. You remember that slogan?
No, I didn't know that. No.
I don't know why. The green dye or something must have been in demand. I don't know, but they changed the green on the packages to white.
That was for the cigarette.
Yeah.
They were good for you, weren't they, in those days?
Oh yeah.
And you smoked.
The doctors will tell you.
When did you start smoking?
Well, my father always smoked.
Yeah.
And my father smoked Helmars. Did you ever hear of Helmars? They were Turkish cigarettes. And
Oh.
they're very strong. No filters, of course. So that's what he smoked. But I started smoking when I first went to college.
What did you do in high school? I mean, you must have been a good student.
Yes.
Did you
But-
belong to any clubs and things
Yeah,
like
well,
that?
I was on the school newspaper, and I ended up being the editor of the school newspaper. And I really didn't have time to participate in too many other clubs, but I know I was in the math club, And
So you were a geek.
yes, I was.
Did you date a lot? Did you have, or what
No.
did they do in those days? I mean, was there a lot of dating, or did people go out in groups, or?
Well, there was dating and there was groups, but I wasn't involved in either one of them. I had girlfriends. And I guess when we were in high school, we used to have parties where we'd invite boys, but we were the nerds. We were not the popular girls.
So you weren't a cheerleader then?
I wasn't a cheerleader. Once a year, Dar, we would go to the Thanksgiving Day football game. There were two high schools in town. So on Thanksgiving, there was the big rivalry between the two schools. So that was the only football game I ever went to, was once a year.
But you didn't like it. I know you didn't.
Well, I wasn't interested.
You weren't interested in it.
I wasn't interested.
But and you weren't interested in the boxing either, probably.
And I didn't ride a bike. I did have skates, but I was not a very good skater.
Like the roller skates for the street.
Yeah, roller skates. No, I never went ice skating.
But you didn't ride your bike much.
Well, I had a tricycle when I
Okay.
was younger. I never had a two-wheel bike.
Mhm. Now, how long was it before I know your parents moved to Washington, because you took me
Yeah,
there
you saw
this
the
year,
store.
and we saw the store and the apartment, and the store's now become a coffee shop, as you
Yeah.
know. But when did they move there?
When I graduated from high school.
Okay, and so you never lived there?
Well, I went to college, but I come home for the summers, so I lived there and, for a couple of summers.
Did they open another store?
Yeah. No, the one that you saw
Yeah.
in Washington.
But why did they move there?
Because business was better in Washington.
Oh.
Esther's parents had moved there a few years before. And Washington was booming, business was better, and I said my parents never had a vacation. So when I graduated from high school in the end of June, that's when they sold the store. And they took the summer off. And we went up to the mountains and we rented a bungalow in what they call a bungalow colony. And
Was that in the Catskills then?
in the Catskills, in Ellenville. And we spent the summer there. And then at the end of the summer, we went to Washington, and we must have stayed with Esther's parents or something, and they were looking for. I went off to college, and they were looking for a business. And by the time I came home, Christmas vacation, they had bought a store, and that apartment that you saw.
Did they buy the store this time, you think? Or did they just lease it?
Well, they didn't buy the building, but they
Okay.
owned the business.
Yeah.
They had a landlord.
And it was the same kind of business?
Well, it was that was more what they called a delicatessen.
Okay.
But basically, they also sold. They didn't have an ice cream.
Mhm.
They didn't have a soda fountain.
Yeah.
But they sold cold cuts, and they sold some groceries, and of course, again, magazines and cigarettes and stuff like that. But when I was growing up, I read every comic book, every movie magazine, every newspaper. They were all there, and as I said, I hung around the store a lot.
If you kept them, you'd be a multimillionaire now. Not that you aren't, I didn't mean that. Well, let's just stop for this week, and we'll talk again next week. If you have some things you can think of that, about Patterson that we haven't talked about, is anything important to you, you can add it right now, but
Well,
were you happy?
yes, I was happy. There were times, I'm sure there were times when I wasn't happy, and you asked about my activities at school. As I said, I was very involved with the paper, and with my senior year, I was co-editor of the Senior Mirror, which was, our graduation book. And I remember trying out for a play once, and I was offered a part, but then I turned it down because I didn't have time to go to rehearsals. I was spending so much time with the newspaper.
Mm-hmm. But you were still working in the store.
Well, I helped out,
Yeah.
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 Well, my freshman year, which I started high school in 36, it was 36, 37.
And the first thing you thought of is, boy, I really hope I can move to Bellevue.
Yeah. In the spring of 37, probably around May, my father's brother, this is my Uncle Charlie, who we haven't really mentioned, but and my father's family also, there were his sister, Helen, and then his brother, who didn't come here until after World War One, because he was young. For some reason, he wasn't able to come, and of course, nobody could come during the war, but after the war, and he was married. He and his wife came, and they were the ones that were considered the affluent ones in the family. He was in the garment business. He was an owner. I mean, he was a very good. He wasn't a good businessman, but he was a designer, and he supervised the operations of making this a pretty good, a high class line of clothes. And they lived in New York. They lived in Brooklyn. But he and his wife had gone back to Europe one or two times before. And they were planning this trip in 1937 with some of their friends. There was a whole group who were going. And they asked my father. And my mother really encouraged him to go, because her mother had died a few years before. And she never got a chance to go back and see her mother. And his mother was still alive. His father had died, but his mother was still alive. And she wanted him to go. And, now when people go to Europe, you go for 2 weeks. Well, you didn't do that then. It was a week traveling each way. They went on the Queen Mary. And then...
probably a train, too, across Europe.
Yeah, well, they took a train across Europe, and then they were in Poland for 2 weeks. And then they were in Paris, and then they were in England. They were in England for the coronation of King George VI in 1937.
That was after his brother abdicated, right? That was the right time, yeah.
Yeah. So...
they probably heard the King's speech. The movie. They probably heard the actual speech.
Well, I don't know. But they saw the parade and all that. So so my mother encouraged him to go, and I was 13, and it just happened that semester our high school was very crowded, and it was on double session. So I went in the morning, and I was through by 12 o'clock. So I said, my mother said she would run the store by herself, and I helped her, and we did.
Well, it's interesting. It was the same teacher all day, wasn't it? I mean, can you imagine today asking teachers to work?
No. This was in high school. We had different teachers for every subject.
No, I meant that the teachers would be there for the 2 sessions. You said there was
Oh,
two
no.
sessions.
Well, I don't know that
know.
the teachers worked the 2 sessions.
You
They were
don't.
probably different teachers. I have no idea.
I wonder.
No, I don't think the teachers worked the double sessions.
So you think they got to go home at noon too?
Yeah.
Ah.
Or maybe it was spread out somehow. But
it'd be interesting to know. Now, this Charlie, is Charlie, did you say his name?
yeah, that was my father's brother
Yeah. And where did his family end up?
in Brooklyn.
No, they're there now?
Well, no. Charlie died.
I know Charlie died, of course.
Yeah, they all died. I mean, and then they lived in Florida for a couple of years, and then they went back to New York. They lived in Manhattan. No, they didn't always live in Brooklyn, but when the daughters were growing up, that's where they.
But there
lived.
must be grandchildren and all that are still around.
So their daughters that were May and Sylvia. Sylvia she's 2.5 weeks younger than I am. She's the mother of Jamie that you know.
Oh yes, down in San Francisco or Berkeley.
Right, and she and her husband live in Florida. Excuse me. But she's the only surviving member of that generation.
Except for you, you mean?
Yeah, except
Yeah.
for me. My only surviving cousin.
Hmm.
Well, there is one other. There's of the ones who were that I knew all my life. As I said, my Aunt Helen, who came after World War II, her son Guy, who also lives in Florida now, he's still alive. But you know, I know him, but
Yeah.
hardly.
Well, we'll talk next week some more, and hopefully I might add here, because someone might be watching this at a later date and not know what we're talking about when we talk about the King's speech.
Oh,
What is it?
well, it was the movie about about King George, who stuttered and learned how to talk without stuttering.
Right. So we've just seen that movie this year, so you know, if someone's watching this in 10 years, they might not know what we're talking about. All right,
Yeah.
well, we'll talk next week, and I know we're all glad that you moved to Bellevue.
Well, glad to
All
hear it.
family, and
Glad
you
to
think
hear it.
about the family we have here, we're both very lucky, aren't we? To have the lives we do.
Yes, I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, and me too.
And
All right,
we
we'll talk.
well, we'll talk about that now.
Okay.